Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me.
We do like to talk about sex on this podcast a lot.
We do. I also love the downloads that get dropped in. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to start this, but I know that Spirit's going to have something as soon as I hit record. So today we have a guest after dark / also really light where she is. Ariel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I also like that we just started this podcast with giggles.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It's the best. Yeah. They never know what's going to come up when I start talking. So, because I obviously don't let anyone know beforehand because I don't know.
Yeah. Nothing is scripted here. So we just let it flow and whatever's supposed to happen will happen. So far it's worked.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me into this space.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, let's just get the listeners to know a little bit about who you are. Just kind of give us your non-professional bio.
Okay. My non-professional bio. I would say that I am an edge walker and I love exploring altered states of consciousness. And I spend most of my time just finding ways to deepen my connection to myself and other people and plants and the elements.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
I like the Edgewalker title. I'm like, that's kind of sexy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long would you classify yourself as someone that does those things?
I would say that my whole life, but it's taken different forms. And the chapter of my life that I'm in now, I'm actually making connection. Whereas many chapters previous in my life, I was like attempting to in ways that actually just created more disconnection.
Ditto. I get that.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, and it's taken like many forms for me, like through art and music, through sex and sex work, through psychedelics and plant medicine, and sometimes through risk taking that leads me to awesome, wonderful, connective places, and sometimes that leaves me flat on my ass.
So you just said a lot of things that could go a lot of different places. Do you care to jump in on any of those categories and give us some more detail?
I'm wondering if you could ask me a question maybe that you might like to know more about.
Okay, so I want to hear about falling flat on your face because we all have, of course. But I'm intrigued by all of the categories. So maybe if you pick like the one that you feel like you're most connected to, and give us a little more detail about how it's kind of manifested in that category.
Sure. So those two threads actually bring me to sex work because when I first got into sex work, I was really trying to find connection from a place of disempowerment. So it was not possible. And it led me to a lot more disconnection, into a lot of trauma and falling flat on my face all the time, over and over. But now kind of through my journey and where I've been led, I've like transmuted all of that. And now I'm like touching people and offering spaces where they can explore their erotic connection with themselves in a way that actually provides more connection.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, like, because I actually didn't read your official bio, or I am coming to you as our listeners are, like literally knowing nothing about you, right? Yeah. So I'm so excited to be here. But if I were to come to you and say, I would like to explore said erotic connection with my partner or with myself, like how would you step in and what would that look like practically?
Yeah, so it could look like so many different things, but it would start with kind of figuring out like, where are you with your ability to like use your voice to say yes or no? And we'd start there. We'd also probably start with some education and experiential games around consent.
Mhm.
Jade, where are you with your voice?
Me?
Yeah. Can you say yes or no with your partner?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good with my voice at this
Yay!
point in my life. But would I be with you in person or would we do this virtually? Like what?
It could be either.
Okay.
What what's really special for me about being able to work with people in person is that if it's desired by the client and I can do so with a full heart with me, we can move into body work, and it can even include full body touch.
Mm-hmm.
So I can provide this container where it's called sexological body work. Um, it's one-way touch where the person receiving gets to really focus on their experience, and it's client directed touch. So they just get to really focus on like what feels good to me, in what ways do I want to like explore my body or have someone's hands help me move energy. But also it's like pleasure work is inherently grief work.
Mhm.
So often there's like a lot
Whoa.
of grief tending happening.
That is a loaded comment and so true.
Mm.
Say that again.
Pleasure work is so often grief work.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I want to know, because there's obviously a journey to get to this space and to get to what you do.
Mhm.
Why and how? Where did it start? Like, what was the spark? What was the initial kind of catalyst that got you into that line of work?
Yeah, so I guess the catalyst, it like my mind is going on like all these different tendrils, but it's my own grief. It's
Mhm.
my own grief work of sexual abuse starting from when I was a child up into my 20s, and my own healing path of that. And finding that in my own exploration of all these different modalities that like I actually needed to heal these touch wounds with touch.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so I want to provide that to other people.
Hmm.
Did you see someone to help you heal those wounds, or was that a lot of that kind of self work?
It's been both. Because when I first found out about the Somatic Sex Education Institute, which is out of Canada, where I did my training,
Mhm.
I hadn't yet seen a sexological body worker. I just felt really pulled. So, like, my process of unfolding with that particular modality kind of occurred while I was also training in the modality. So, I was like a student and doing my own healing work while I was a student.
Yeah,
That's the best way, in my opinion.
totally. Yeah, I get that.
Like, I will somatically experience and dissect
Mhm.
on many different planes.
Mhm.
Yeah, like one of the first assignments we had was to start your own pleasure practice, like a mindful erotic practice, they call it. So, like every day for 30 days, spend 30 minutes like exploring your pleasure. And I mean, just that in itself, it can be like so transformative.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That isn't like that's kind of reminds me. No wonder you keep mentioning like psychedelics and pleasure in the same, because when I decide to use plant medicine in that way, it's not like woohoo, this is going to be a blast. It's like, oh, this is going to be work. This is a journey. This is a trip. This is like hard work, and it's reminding me of that.
And this is why Jade and I are so different, because Jade's like, that's a lot of work. Meanwhile, I'm like, okay, add 30 minutes to calendar every day for next 30 days.
Yeah, I'm like, damn. Oh, it's a lot
I'm
of
like,
work.
okay, starting November 18th, then moving on to December 18th, ending right around Christmas. We're good to go.
Yeah.
But actually, that is a good transition, though. Where does the psychedelics come into play with this? And like, where was that in your timeline? Did you work with psychedelics before, or like where was it?
Yeah, so psychedelics have been part of my path like since being a teenager, but not intentionally until maybe like 5 or 6 years ago or something like that.
Mhm.
But it was starting to drink ayahuasca that like was like, no, you are quitting your sales job and you are going back to school and you are aligning on your soul path, and transmuting all this trauma that you've been like hiding from and running from by keeping super busy.
Which, having sat with Mama Aya, I know that was a super easy journey for you, and you just graciously accepted as soon as she said it, and you were like, of course, I'll quit my job.
No problem.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been these two things for me have like been very intertwined and intermingled, and they're both ways to access altered states of consciousness.
Yeah.
And I do also use plant medicine psychedelics in my work as well, and they can be exclusive or not. So yeah, they can be worked with in parallel. They can be worked with together, but when they're worked with together, like for example, I wouldn't work with someone in a like explicitly erotic state while they're on a high dose of psychedelics. Like those two things don't go together for me. But like when I go receive bodywork sessions when I'm trading with another colleague, I love microdosing and receiving bodywork. It's just like awesome.
So which psychedelics do you prefer to work with?
That was my question.
So if I'm taking like a microdose for bodywork, I like working with Huachuma, San Pedro, or mushrooms. But I also love just working with in higher doses, like for my own journeying, MDMA, ayahuasca. I went through a stage with ketamine, but I'm currently not called by that particular substance. And also currently not called by cannabis, but used to work with cannabis a lot.
That would be an interesting one from, again, psychology standpoint, cannabis and what it does to the brain, and then also sex and what it does to the brain, and how those two kind of go together, but don't necessarily go together, and how you use them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it reminds me of this podcast I recently listened to of this guy who writes about prostate massage and using cannabis for it. And like I know in India, like with Tantra, cannabis, it was like part of the thing. So like I think cannabis at low doses works beautifully with exploring erotic spaces.
I know for people who have had cancer treatments and such, they'll use like cannabinoid lubricants and stuff to help with some of those effects. But would you say that it's good for the everyday person, or is it definitely something that is for a particular person or someone that has had particular trauma or experiences?
I feel like it's so personal. Like I think that there's certain strands of cannabis that are best for the purpose of exploring erotic spaces with yourself or with a partner. But I feel like it's so individual on like, how does that particular plant work with this person's biochemistry? Or like the reason I'm taking a break is because for some reason right now, whenever I smoke it, I just feel really icky. But I've gone through periods of time when it's felt really supportive. So
what about Mama Aya? Because, right, Cass will chat about at great length when you are going to sit in ceremony with her, it doesn't necessarily mix well with sex. And so what's your experience with that?
Yeah, well, I have had a lot of sex on Mother Ayahuasca, but not in this physical realm, like in realms. And it's been some of the most, like most of my ceremonies, I would say, are pretty difficult, maybe sometimes excruciating. But sometimes I have these super blissed out, pleasurable ceremonies where I'm having sex. It's happened before to me in like bigger ceremonies where I actually experience having sex with someone else who's in the ceremony. Again, not in this plane, but
physical,
like, in the medicine space. I've also had the experience of having sex with the shamans. But then one day when I was integrating my trip, I was like, wait, they didn't consent to that. Like, am I crossing a boundary? And it's never happened again.
That's interesting to me, because like one of the things that, as a shaman who holds that ceremony space is contained to do is to basically create a contained matrix around each of your people so that doesn't happen, especially like within Shipibo and kind of like more Peruvian, Colombian kind of cultures. So it's interesting. And like, I've seen where, you know, people will have these experiences in these other realms and in these more ethereal states and in these higher states of consciousness where they're tapping into that kind of sexual connection. But it makes me have like a lot of questions of like, where did you sit? Who was serving? How did it brew? Like I have all of the like shaman questions going through my head of like, ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of along the same lines. My question is, you mentioned that you were having sex with someone else in the ceremony. Did you talk to them about it afterwards? Did they have the same experience, or was it just you?
I did not talk to him about it afterwards, so I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I also think of quantum entanglement and I think of like past lives and where that kind of comes into play. If there was some sort of quantum entanglement that was happening during ceremony that you needed to heal from that like was happening in your realm. And so that's kind of tapping off of Jade's question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I could go down that path for far too long though.
Right? I know.
That makes me feel a little bit better about some things that happened in my brain during my ayahuasca ceremony.
How many people did you have sex with?
Yeah, Jay, give it to us. We know what your past lives or one of your past lives, madam, at the brothel. So
Yeah, brothel hoe.
Just one person, but I was like, I don't think that's supposed to be happening. So yeah, that makes you feel better.
Did you panic during it and like get
No.
away from it, or did you let it happen?
No, I let it happen, but I had some feelings of guilt around it, or like I felt bad, which we know from past conversations that that's par for the course for me. And one of the very things that ayahuasca Mama I was trying to heal in me, right? The guilt and shame piece. So yeah.
So my real question for both of you guys, was it good?
It's the best.
Yeah, it
right.
Would definitely do it again.
She's like 10 out of 10, highly recommend.
Yeah. But I have had physical sex with quite a dose of psilocybin and acid too, and I really loved that too. It's a very different experience. Mm-hmm.
I love physical sex on LSD.
Yeah,
it's some of the most amazing, like pushing past trauma sex I've ever had in my life.
Why?
I remember this one day where my partner and I just had like amazing sex where all of my like usual triggers, it was just like they were gone. And I was able to just be totally present and do things that usually trigger me. And it was just like, it felt like an endless stream of pleasure.
Now, my question for you kind of post, because I know that there's obviously an integration period with every psychedelic, like after, were you able to continue those things without trigger?
Yes, I was for a period of time. And it still has like always shifted and morphed. I find that sometimes like with specific sexual acts, I'll be really into them for a while and then I'll be like, actually, I don't want to do that right now. And then I might come back to it.
Yeah. Like food or handbags or anything else. So
yeah. Yeah.
I know. So you've talked about partner. Where is this when it comes to, or people that you've worked with, heterosexual and homosexual relationships and sexual acts and such? Do you feel like you helped both? Or bisexual, group sex? Like, where is that in all of this?
Yeah. I want to just clarify to make sure I understand your question.
Yeah.
Do you mean like, what is my personal experience or the people I work with, or?
Yeah. So just in general, like, is that something that you've worked with before, and what experiences have you helped people with?
Do you feel like you're able to help people, if they're not just heterosexual, if they're also homosexual or transgender or whatever, like that? Yeah.
So I'm a queer person myself. And I work with and have worked with both heterosexual people, bisexual people, queer people. I have worked with, I have a client right now who's trans, and I do feel like I have like the capacity with myself to in integrity hold that space, but I also always say to someone who I don't have the same lived experience with, like is that important to you? Like, do
Yeah.
you need someone who understands in that way to hold the space? And if so, then I'm probably not gonna be the best person for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a
That's
cis woman.
interesting. Yeah. That's very interesting. Do you feel like this crosses all, like anyone can find help in this then?
Yeah, definitely.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
And
Yes,
I
you're
think
like, yes.
like, yeah, there's definitely, like, I've noticed in my work with cis women versus cis men, there's definitely like specific things that I end up working with that are often common patterns. Of course, it's not always the case for everyone. But I noticed like I've more recently started working with cis men. I just wasn't ready to before.
Yeah.
And that's been really interesting, and like how I have to, like, I've noticed at the beginning, for me to hold the container in integrity, I have to take going into explicitly erotic places together off the table, because they are so conditioned to soothe themselves when they're afraid of connecting by sexualizing.
Yeah.
I like remove that option or make it really obvious in the space by saying, oh, like this is happening right now. Like you're afraid of connecting with me, so you're immediately wanting to go to a sexual place with me.
Interesting.
What are some of the other patterns that you've noticed kind of between, you know, men and women, or even masculine and feminine in your work?
So I've noticed, so there's this awesome thing called the Wheel of Consent by Betty Martin. And, you know, there's, if you're familiar with it, there's the 4 quadrants, and men are often like really good at take. And that just means, for someone who doesn't know, like really often good at like knowing what they want and then taking pleasure for themselves. And then women are often, and they often might be like find themselves in the shadow sides of it.
Yep.
And women are often really good at serving, like giving to someone else what they want, or they might be in the shadow and what be like what they think the other person wants, or so that's really common pattern I see.
I've always wondered too, with that Wheel of Consent, is there a, like, what is the ideal state?
So the ideal state is that you are comfortable and have the ability to be in all 4 quadrants.
And say the 4 quadrants really quickly.
Yeah, so they're take, allow, accept, and serve.
Love it.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes. I love the Wheel of Consent. I've done some work with clients on that as well, and
awesome.
I think it's a good visual for people to just see and kind of understand and absorb.
Yeah.
Especially like the calling out of the shadow side, I secretly love.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing is too, is like, we've all been in all of the shadows, and it's okay.
Yeah. And something that Kaylin kind of mentioned, but I'm curious about too, have you found that like group sex is helpful at all, or have you found it a deterrent? Is it something that you've facilitated yourself? Can you talk a little bit about that, if you have anything to say?
Sure. So what comes to mind for me is I have never facilitated group sex. I've been a part of some group sex. I am myself very wary of situations like that, even though I have a desire to be in them. And yeah, I think they can be super awesome, powerful, healing experiences, just because pleasure and fun can be really healing. It can also bring up a lot of like difficulty if all the people in the room are not clear on what they need, want, and know how to communicate, because you have so many people's different needs and desires in the room. So it's just like, I mean, if I was in a room, a group of people who were like on point about what they need, their boundaries and communication, I'd be like, let's go. And it can be hard to find people who also want to like explore erotic space with each other.
Yeah.
Can you tell the listeners kind of what your first exploration of erotic space was?
Masturbation when I was a little girl.
Okay. Taking it up one more level. What's the, like, what is, I don't think Yes, I totally agree and understand. It's one that I'm like,
Same.
yeah. You're like, yeah, same.
I'm sorry, I can take things really literally sometimes.
You're like, there was this toothbrush holder when I was. You're like, no. I'm like, no. There has to be one good laugh on every podcast. But like after that, like, so like what I'm thinking of is like people, like, I don't know if people would know what the entry point is. Obviously masturbation, self, etc. But like, what is the next level of that?
So I'm just curious again if I'm like being super literal, but I'm thinking about like, okay, like I mean, I started exploring with other people very young. And I would say that I started to take quantum leaps in my own exploration with my own eroticism when I started having a mindful self-pleasure practice.
Mm-hmm. So back to that 30 days on the calendar. God damn it.
And what are the bullet points under a mindful self-pleasure practice? What does that entail? What does that, if that's
I'm like trying to conceptualize that and I can't conceptualize that.
You do realize that we're going to have a podcast in 30 episodes talking about our 30 days of mindful sexual experience because of you, right?
Okay, well, I can definitely provide like a free resource for this that people can download. But yeah, so it's like you set up your space, like create a cozy space for you. You might want to have some like lubricant or sex toys or chocolate or a blanket, like, you know, whatever you're thinking you want to have. I like to use music. So I'll use playlists that are 30 minutes long with 10 minutes after it of silence for like savoring and integration. And then I set an intention. So like maybe my intention is to explore different pressures and paces on my body. Maybe it's to get to know the shame in my belly. Maybe it's to rest, like whatever it is. And then I explore, and really the practice is about letting go of goal orientation and just about like finding new ways to be with your body, your emotions, your desires. And then, you know, if you come across any, and while orienting towards pleasure, and then if at any point you come across difficult emotions or sensations, like, can you introduce these difficult parts to pleasure? Are they open to feeling some pleasure right now? And like, orgasm is awesome and welcome, but that's not what this is about. This is like, what else is possible? And like, maybe you decide to go roll around naked in the grass or cook something and like eat something you really like. It's like endless possibilities, but then there's that beautiful container of ritual that provides some steadiness and grounding. And then once you complete like savoring, integrating, and then I like journaling afterwards. Like, what did I learn about my body or my desires today? What was hot? What was hard?
So it really does sound like a very deep embodiment practice then for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's powerful. And also, like, practically speaking, you have to be in a space in your life where you can do that. Like, I'm trying to imagine Kayla.
Oh no, Kaylin's starting in about a week. I mean, you don't think we're going to do this and then publish our results on the podcast? Come on, guys. That's going to be the perfect Christmas episode.
To be fair, I am 4 weeks postpartum right now. So,
which to be fair is probably the best time to start. That's a story for a different day.
Oh, bless it.
But no, I love that. That's so beautiful. It reminds me of mirror work or something like that. Like, right? Like just spending such intentional time like on yourself and looking at yourself.
Yeah. And I think the biggest importance for me about it is always to remind people of like, this is about orienting towards pleasure. Not about like excavating your suffering, and it's like that will happen naturally, but like let's try to find joy and pleasure and what feels good to you.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be physical touch. Like mental stimulation is absolutely there. Like you were talking about, even like cooking, right? Like that's a whole different set of pleasure. So yeah, it seems like it's, from when you first said it, I'm like, oh dear God, that, like, I'm with Jada, like, that sounds exhausting. But now as you go into it, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That does. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that it's like, I think I'm just making it personal. Like I have a lot of codependent issues that I'm healing from. And I think doing something like that would be so empowering and so bring things back to self, as opposed to trying to always kind of give yourself away to someone else. Yeah, that would be very empowering.
What were some of the biggest things you found out kind of during your first 30-day segment?
One is that I'm responsible for my pleasure. And yeah, like a whole lot of grief. Like a whole lot of grief that I just really needed to feel. And that, like, no one can fuck me like I can fuck myself.
That needs to be, well, clearly we have the quote of the podcast.
Yeah, that's some empowerment right there. That's some TPE, baby.
Seriously.
I love that so hard.
I kind of want a bumper sticker, you guys.
I kind of want a t-shirt.
I'm like, where do we go after that statement?
I know, like, okay, bye. So nice to meet you.
Exactly.
I'm going to start my practice right now. I gotta.
Can you tell me about the free resource that we're providing to the listeners? I think that's also interesting.
And to our group.
And to us.
Yeah, it's like a 2-page kind of template, I'll say, that I give to people that work with me on how to start their own practice. So it's like instructions that you can use exactly as they are, or make it your own.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. What I also like, and I feel is refreshing about you, is I feel like sex work, I've had a decent number of clients that are in that kind of field. There's always an air of like awkwardness, I feel like, with them. And I feel like you're just like so approachable and easeful with it, of just like laying it all out there and being like, it is what it is. Here's like, also like, there's no longer like a almost a hierarchy is what I see typically in that field of like, this is what I've done, this is how I've done it. And you're just like, I went through grief work, like plain and simple. Like I've also been there, which I think is just really refreshing to have someone who can and is able to guide because they've also walked that path.
Yeah, thank you. And when I hear you provide that reflection, the thing that comes to me is like, damn, because I've also done my shame work.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The layers of shame that can encompass around sex work and other people's shame about sex work.
I have a question for you. Talking about grief and shame and such, and in sex work, do you feel like you've helped people who maybe don't have grief around sexual experiences but have grief in other areas of their lives? Or like, do you feel like it comes through in erotic sexual ways, or do you feel like they're separate?
Yeah, so yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like they all kind of meld together, and I've definitely worked with people who don't come to me at all to work on anything sexual, and we do a ton of grief work around a bunch of different things. And I have never met one person in my life that doesn't have grief around sex. I believe that everyone is sexually traumatized.
Interesting. Wait, tell us more.
We live in such a shameful culture around sex. Like, it's like I'm just having a lot of feelings right now. I don't kind of have words flowing to me, but yeah, it's like there's no real education. There's like most people are not taught about stuff by their families or schools, or the stuff they are taught is very shame based. This is wrong, this is bad. And then people get all of their information from porn. Then yeah,
which is not reality.
yeah.
Yeah,
The
I don't.
education piece is fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think that statement is too big, and I would dare anyone to try to refute that statement that every human being has some sort of trauma or grief or shame around sex, even if you can't even necessarily put it into words.
And going back to kind of that, we often talk about the suppression of consciousness that we kind of have globally and that we have going on through, social media and technology and, addiction and medication and the healthcare industry. And like all of these things are to suppress consciousness. There's a parallel that comes to mind when you said that is like, if people actually were able to tap into their root and sacral chakra, into that divine sexual, into that divine creator, creatrix person energy, like that consciousness naturally raises.
Mm.
So you may not have words, but I'm getting words for you, girl.
Yeah, holy shit, Cass. You just unlocked a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Well, it's true though, because I mean, that's where people get their, if you're also looking at like downloads and connection to higher consciousness and connection to universe, and like, I forget who, I think it was Mama Gina said, like, if you're feeling creatively stuck, go have an orgasm. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it is our creative energy. It's our life force energy. And another thing that I thought of that came to me in a bodywork session is I realized that I have these erotic roots of protection. And I realized that actually my eroticism protects me. When I used to think that because of what I've been taught by our society, is that I have to hide my eroticism to stay safe. And actually, I am much more vulnerable when I'm hiding.
thanks, patriarchy.
Yeah, say
Yeah,
some more words about that.
Yeah, so it's like, I feel like any time where we're hiding anything, trying to suppress anything, we can't protect ourselves because we can get really confused or unclear on like, what are my needs and boundaries right now? Whereas when you're like fully in your erotic power, which is your life force energy, which is your creativity, your intuition, your empowerment, then you can get really clear on like, well, actually, this is what I want. This is what I need. This is what I'm going to say no to. And I'm not saying that it's like this magic protection where sometimes bad shit just happens and people do things and it's not your fault. But yeah, when you are like allowing yourself to feel into the sacral chakra and allowing that energy to move through you, move out of you, be in contact with other people, you're in your authentic expression then, and then you can be really clear about how you want to be in relationship with people.
But I feel like we're the ones who fuck it up, because if you look back to like Kundalini and Shakti and a lot of the old like ancient texts, like even like the Ayurvedic texts and things of that nature, like they are all about that rising and about that energy and about harnessing and utilizing that energy. Like that's true sex education versus just using it for personal gain.
Yeah. I mean, I again go back to my cognitive psychology brain, and I just, when you talk about education and things like that and the shame that society is kind of built, at least in the US and in our culture, around sex and talking about sex and being sexual beings, it is so interesting because we are that, as if you are human or if you are a being, it is a literal, it was a life or death thing. Like that's the origins of it within us, right? Is to procreate. That was its purpose, but it continues and it grows, and we are smart and we have evolved as humans. And of course that there is a whole pleasure center of our brain around that. And the fact that it is so taboo of a subject to talk about, and there's this shame around it within our culture, it only hurts us. So there is no one is better off because of it. It's so strange.
Yeah, we are sexual beings. No way around it.
Do you have strong opinions about monogamy?
So what I feel about a monogamy is that it's a wonderful thing if you choose it. And I feel like it's so often something that people fall into out of, I have to do this. So
It's chosen for you. It's chosen for you.
Right. So anything that's like chosen for someone, that's never really a great position to be in. But like monogamy's awesome, non-monogamy's awesome. It's all beautiful. Like whatever feels good for you.
Yeah, I knew you would say that. I just wanted you to say it out loud. It's like almost like a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I've done both in my life. And I think at various points in my life, I've needed different things. And it might continue to ebb and flow in my life. I might be non-monogamous now for the rest of my life. I have no idea.
Love it.
Anything else that's coming through for you, or anything else you want to add that we haven't tapped off of? We've gone all over as per usual. Any final words to the listeners?
Maybe just that song again. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be.
Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. I'm glad I'm not the only one who sings on the podcast now.
You're
That's our
welcome
criteria
back
for coming back.
anytime.
Will you sing with Cass on the
Exactly.
podcast?
We just invited her back
Correct.
simultaneously.
Obviously, after we finish our 30 days of pleasure.
Yeah, I want to hear all about it.
That would actually be a fun follow-up. So
Why
throwing that
not?
out there.
Absolutely. Well, having not known where this conversation was going to go, I am just beyond pleasantly surprised and just ecstatic that I got to meet you and have this conversation with you. I think you are an amazing woman and very beautiful and shiny inside and out.
Yeah, it was a very
Thank you.
pleasurable experience.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and letting us ask you questions and not really knowing where we're going to take this, but riding this journey with us. Like,
Ooh, riding this journey, Kaylin.
Yeah.
Reverse cowgirling this journey.
Oh my God.
always, Jade, you and the damn reverse cowgirl.
Oh, thank you all so much. This was a very pleasurable journey.
Hey.
And we will put notes in the show notes so you guys can see the Wheel of Consent if you're not familiar with it. If you guys want the free resource that Ariel has mentioned a couple of times, that obviously Jade, Kaylin, and myself are going to use.
Oh, wait. And where can we find you? I'm writing it down.
Oh, all right. I am on Instagram at Sacred Moonflower, and you can learn more about my practice and retreats and ceremonies that I run at sacredmoonflower.com.
And we'll make sure we link out to all of those in the show notes as well.
So I don't need to write it down.
No, you don't. I got you. So awesome. Thank you.
All right.